Hi, everyone. Welcome to our briefing with our team just back from Ukraine. I am Jim Hake, the founder and CEO at Spirit of America. And I'm very, very happy and delighted to see so many of our supporters on the call today, including members of our board. And all three of us, in fact, the whole organization, want to thank you for letting us talk with you today and for the support you provide that lets us do the work you're going to hear about. As background for everyone, Spirit of America is a privately funded 501c3 nonprofit, and we are a citizen service organization. So we are all about the contributions that citizens can make to America and what America stands for. You can think of this as patriotism without politics. This is our 20th year, and for 20 years, we have worked alongside U.S. troops and diplomats all over the world to provide private assistance to fill the gaps between what's needed and what government can do to defend freedom and advance democracy. So right now, the Spirit of America team is active in Taiwan, West Africa, and the Middle East, and of course, Ukraine. We've been active in Ukraine since 2014, and everything we've been doing since then has been helping Ukraine defend its freedom against Russian aggression. And since the full-scale invasion in 2022 began, our focus has been on providing non-lethal assistance to help Ukraine's soldiers. And we're doing that because we understand that Ukraine is the front lines of the fight to defend the free world. So our goal in Ukraine is to save lives and defend freedom by helping Ukraine win. We have raised $70 million, thanks to many of you on this call. We've raised $70 million to that end and provided a wide range of non-lethal assistance to Ukraine's military. And all of that is based on needs identified by U.S. troops. And we have an unprecedented partnership with the U.S. military. It's based on an agreement with the U.S. Department of Defense that allows the military to collaborate with us, receive and distribute assistance, and provide logistical support. So today we're going to be hearing from Colleen Denny and Matt Dimmick. Colleen is our European Regional Director. She has been with the organization for just over 5 years now, and she's one of the veterans on our field team. She was on the ground in Poland and is providing support into Ukraine just a few days after the invasion in 2022. Matt Dimmick, we're going to hear from first. He's our Regional Program Manager. He's also one of the veterans on our team, former Russia director on the National Security Council, where he served as the president's principal advisor on Russia from 2019 to 2021. So Matt, I'll start with you. And if you could give us your assessment of what's happening on the front lines in Ukraine, let's get started with that.
Sure, Jim. There's just no denying right now that the situation on the front lines in Ukraine is hard. It's maybe as hard as it's ever been since the darkest days during the initial months of the fighting. And unfortunately, the conditions are only getting harder as well for the Ukrainians. They're experiencing shell shortages, ammunition rationing. They've got equipment shortages. It's just tough to get everything that they need when they need it in the amounts that they need in order to do the most fighting that they need to do. So they're also suffering personnel losses. As attrition grinds on, they're losing more people than they can replace. And in the larger scheme of things, back in Kiev, there's senior leader shakeups that have rocked the Ukrainian military that are imposing some doubt, some uncertainty, and that's affecting troops on the front lines as well. And there's just hard questions too about will the West continue long-term support for Ukrainian frontline troops? Will the amounts of equipment, material, ammunition continue to flow in the amounts that they need to win this war? And those are huge question marks. And then on top of that, the Russians are sensing all of this. So they are pressing attacks in multiple areas across the front line with really intense, brutal frontal assaults, partly because they sense there's less firepower in the hands of the Ukrainians. They're getting less artillery returning from Ukrainian guns. And, partly it's also because of an urgent need that the Russians feel to deliver some successes to Putin's doorstep in advance of his next coronation election in March. So there's calendar issues going on, there's equipment issues, uncertainty about the way things are going to be headed into the coming months. So those are all grim prospects. But despite those headwinds on the front lines and elsewhere, there's still real fire in the Ukrainian spirit. And we saw that with every group we talked to, every counterpart we talked to, every Ukrainian. They're not blind to the challenges, but we were just told more than once. And I think this is common across Ukraine amongst every citizen and everybody who's got a part in this war. And, they're committed. And their sense is that Ukraine will fight as hard as it can, with as much as they have on hand, for as long as they physically can. And honestly, whatever problems Ukrainians have, they are committed to that goal. They're committed to overcoming whatever issues come their way with every bit of effort they can muster until they just physically can't do it anymore. So really, there's no anticipation that the Ukrainians will somehow collapse in the near term or surrender the fight to the Russians or sue for peace. Even 2 years into this exhausting full-scale invasion, they are just as committed to victory as they have ever been. And that shined through in just about every conversation we had. So there's also a number of positive things that the Ukrainians can point to. It's not all doom and gloom. They've swept the Russian Navy from the Western Black Sea completely, so much so that grain shipments now from Odessa are almost fully restored to near pre-war levels. Their infrastructure is holding up under intense bombardment, so much so that Ukrainians are actually making more natural gas this year than they're using. They're on pace to export electricity to neighboring countries. And, the quality of their troops, their tactics, their leadership, they're just outperforming the Russians on the front. And those are all great signs. So they're constantly working to improve their ability to strike the Russians harder, make them pay dearly. And I think they're just only going to continue to improve in those areas. So all in all, there's still hope. If the Ukrainians can get the continued support they need, if they can build up their stockpiles of ammunition and equipment, if they can find a way to replenish their personnel ranks, and if they can continue degrading the Russians faster than the Russians can reconstitute, then maybe there'll be opportunities this year to press their advantage again. But until then, though, more hard fighting ahead for the foreseeable future, and every bit of support that the Ukrainians can get will save more lives and make their work easier. So that's all I have on that score. I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, so just a nutshell on this, Matt, and given the tough situation which you described, can Ukraine still win?
Yes, given they need ammunition, they need equipment, they need every bit of support that the West can offer them. If some of that shuts off, they'll continue to fight, and I would not bet against the Ukrainians, even if some things don't break their way. The will that they have, the spirit that they have, and the fact that they don't have any other options but to beat the Russians on their ground, defend what's theirs, and get it back. That will go a long ways towards eventual victory, whether it's this year or the next year or beyond.
Thank you. And we'll come back with some other questions, which are already coming in. For everyone's benefit, if you do have a question, please submit it through the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, and we'll do our best to get to it in our 21 more minutes. And if not, then we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. So, Colleen, could you give an overview of what you and Matt and the team did on this last trip to Germany, Poland, and Ukraine, what you did, what you learned?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. And thank you to everyone who is joining the Zoom today. We were on the ground for about 2 weeks on this last trip and meeting with all of our program managers and doing several site visits for all the programs that we have going on right now. And also meeting, of course, with our U.S. Special Forces counterparts and their Ukrainian counterparts. So we met with 100+ partners, experts, and people in the space that we need to meet with to best understand that and to make sure that our programs are still the areas that Spirit of America should be investing in, that we should be putting resources in, time in, expertise in, and to make sure that they still have the biggest returns on investment. So, for example, we met with the U.S. Special Forces team that is in Poland that is tasked with training and equipping Ukrainian special operations teams. This U.S. Special Forces team is a team of Green Berets. They have experience in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, and throughout Europe. And they've been training Ukrainian teams, particularly on drone tactics and on medical and casualty exercises, and on joint coordination. So they shared with us how the Ukrainians that they're training with and training are the most professional, the most competent, and by scores and scores, the most motivated. These soldiers are sent outside of Ukraine on their rest and rehabilitation periods. So instead of spending 3 or 4 weeks back home with their families, they then go to Poland and are trained by the U.S. Special Forces teams there. They're working around the clock. They said training wraps up around 1900 every single day, but the Ukrainians are still working with them, spending their free time going over techniques, reading through doctrine, just talking through exercises. They have to send the Ukrainians to bed, they say. So it's truly a program that we've put several $1 million into to support elite Ukrainian units. And we're doing that because we assess that these teams can have outsized impacts on the battlefield. For example, we've been supporting a special military unit that is tasked at the highest levels from the Ukrainian military command, and they are given some of the most operationally significant missions, both long and short range. So by us supporting this team with non-lethal equipment, such as vehicles, secure communications gear, medical gear, thermal mitigating gear, all this force protection gear to help them stay alive and to be able to have outsized impact on the battle space. This is where Spirit of America can help Ukraine inch over the victory line and secure their own democracy and freedom. So meeting with several U.S. Special Forces teams in Poland who are training. And then, of course, when we were in Kyiv on the ground, meeting with partners, meeting with think tanks, meeting with other NGOs, meeting with soldiers that were just on the front lines and are back in Kyiv for training or other business. We met with all of our subject matter experts that on the programs that we are supporting and running, and we were able to see firsthand just the impacts that Spirit of America projects are having. So we can talk a little bit more detail about what we've seen and the differences over the last 2 years. But like Matt said, it's a tough situation in Ukraine right now, but they are not lacking resolve and will fight until the end.
Thanks, Colleen. Of course, we all know we're nearing the 2-year anniversary mark of the full-scale invasion, and you were there just after that. So could you say a little bit about, what is different, what the situation is now compared to back then? A little compare and contrast, please.
Sure. So before the February 24th invasion, I've been talking with the U.S. Special Forces and U.S. Embassy Kyiv for several months, just seeing the Russian buildup along Belarus and Russia and understanding what was probably coming. So on February 24th, on the morning of the full-scale invasion, a U.S. Special Operations Forces team leader called me and asked, how quickly can Spirit of America get here? How quickly can you get on the ground and help us out? So I was first on the ground in Eastern Poland about 96 hours after the full-scale invasion happened. So several things have changed from then until now, but I'll just highlight a few. First, I think, is the Western understanding of Ukrainian capabilities. As many of you may remember, there were many experts who were predicting that Kyiv would fall within days and that the Russian military would conquer all of Ukraine within a few weeks. So this may feel like an obvious observation to make nearly 2 years on, but when I first arrived in Eastern Poland, it truly felt day by day. And that's one reason why Spirit of America was such a lifeline for our U.S. military partners, because we began providing aid immediately, not weeks or months after the full-scale invasion. Another change has just been the nature of warfare. And I've spoken on previous Zooms previous Zoom updates we've had about the role that technology is playing in this conflict, particularly drones. So since the full-scale Russian invasion, Spirit of America, we've provided over 200 surveillance drones to elite Ukrainian units. And our U.S. military partners have shared with us that they're learning from the Ukrainian counterparts about what modern warfare fighting looks like, especially the role that technology has and is playing. So that's also been a major change over the last 2 years. Another difference is just the amount of U.S. government and Western aid. So when I first arrived in February 2022, U.S. military aid was just beginning to arrive and being flown into Poland. So throughout the entire conflict, U.S. and allied aid has, of course, focused on providing lethal aid. And there continues to be huge gaps of non-lethal aid, which we provide and continue to invest in these programs. So, however, on this trip, we heard repeatedly from our U.S. Special Forces partners that their Ukrainian counterparts are low on aid and having to ration their ammunition. And they specifically mentioned a lack of artillery and a lack of air defense. So quite frankly, their assessments are that U.S. and allied aid is not arriving fast enough and not in large enough quantities. So this is directly impacting soldiers on the front line and larger scale operations. But as Matt shared, they're still holding their positions and are still making gains, especially in the Black Sea. One thing that has not changed, though, which we can discuss, with so many examples, is Ukrainian resolve. So keep in mind that we're now 720 days into the full-scale invasion, but we're almost at the 10-year mark of when Russia first invaded Ukraine, when they illegally invaded and annexed Crimea on February 20th, 2014. So Ukraine is a country that has been under invasion for nearly 10 years, and they fully understand what will happen if they don't win. Many of you have probably read the reports and seen in the media what life is like for Ukrainians under Russian occupation. There is rape, torture, murder, mass graves, the kidnapping of children, the elimination of Ukrainian culture and identity. And these atrocities are not happening occasionally or in isolation. This is Russian state policy, and the Russian military is carrying it out. So while Ukrainians don't have an overly optimistic view of the current fight and the challenges they face, they understand that they cannot stop fighting for their existence, and they will not stop.
Thanks, Colleen. That's a great assessment, a powerful assessment. Some questions that are coming in. One is, are the Europeans stepping up as much as they can to support Ukraine? And Matt, I'm going to kick that over to you in a second, just to talk about what you've seen, and Colleen chime in. One of the things, there's a report, a congressional report from 3 Republican-led congressional committees in November. It's about Ukraine, and it addresses this question that part of one of the issues these committees looked at was burden sharing, and as a share of GDP, as a share of gross domestic product, the United States, in terms of support to Ukraine, what percentage of that is? The United States ranks 29th out of all the countries that are supporting Ukraine in terms of percent of GDP that has been directed as assistance. And the majority of those other 28 countries are European countries. So that's a top level picture. But Matt, have you seen anything in terms of what or heard anything about what the Europeans are doing more specifically or tactically?
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, Europeans, as far as GDP per capita, they're certainly pulling their weight. And when you take the European Union contributions, a collection of all those European countries in a mass that's equivalent to the U.S. in terms of population and wealth, Europeans are outspending us and providing more aid and more resources than the U.S. does. So that's a fact. I think that any questions about Europeans not pulling their weight are just not factually true. And there's plenty of support that the Ukrainians are getting from Europe. And as we struggle with our political realm to try to figure out how to get more aid. The Europeans are also figuring out what they might have to do to pick up the slack. So Ukrainians are feeling a lot of support from the Europeans that, of course, they wish they would give more, and some specific countries that have resources and assets and particular weapon systems that the Ukraine would like to see more of. But overall, they're getting plenty of support from the Europeans.
Thanks, Matt. Colleen, anything to add there?
No, nothing significant. Matt covered it great.
So a question, refugees are not our principal focus, but do you have any insight into the status of the millions of refugees from Ukraine? Are they still spread around Europe? Are they coming back? What are you seeing or hearing there?
Sure. It's a combination of both. When we were in Poland, we met with the Special Operations Liaison Officer. He works closely with Polish Special Forces and therefore with Ukrainian Special Forces. And he mentioned just how at the border, at the 6 border checkpoints between Poland and Ukraine, the numbers are very steady, about 10,000 Ukrainians exiting every week and 10,000 also entering every week. So that can be read as a couple different ways. It could be based on holidays or school schedules or just basic movements of people. But the refugee numbers have about stabilized in Europe. And that's another area when we talk about European aid and European allies stepping up. They are hosting millions and millions of Ukrainian refugees, while the United States is hosting less than 200,000. So a significant amount of aid and social welfare is being put into place in the European economies from the host nations that are hosting these millions of Ukrainian refugees. Just as one statistic, the Czech Republic is hosting 1 million Ukrainian refugees, and Czech Republic is a country of less than 10 million. So significant influx of people, mostly of women and children and the elderly are the vast majority of the makeup. So we have done projects to support Ukrainian refugees in Poland and helping smaller nonprofits that have been stood up to support Ukrainian refugees and help them integrate into Poland. We have done some of those, but our significant lion's share of work is helping the Ukrainian armed forces with non-lethal assistance to help them win so those refugees can go back home.
Thank you. Matt, I'm going to direct this one to you. Do you have any information on the performance of Russian troops?
Yeah, there's clear indications from how the Russians are performing on the front lines that the swath of casualties that they've taken over the past 2 years has really eliminated the functional backbone of the Russian military. And if there ever was a time when the Russians were capable of doing large-scale combined offensive operations, those days ended a long time ago due to attrition, losses in leadership, equipment losses. And now what the Russians are reduced to is really just a mass of armed infantry, really only capable of doing frontal assaults. And now when they try to do any kind of combined arms operations, you really see that the people in those tanks, the crews in those tanks, armored vehicles, they just don't know what they're doing. They've got zero training on how to do the more advanced things that they need to do, and you see it when they get slaughtered on the battlefield. So the Russian military is not performing well. They still have the mass and they have the materiel, and they've got plenty of artillery ammunition. So that in itself is having an impact on the front lines as far as them pushing against the Ukrainians. But Ukrainians can at least take some solace in not having to be too concerned about the Russians making some kind of grand exploitation or large-scale maneuver because they've been able to counter everything that Russians have thrown at them so far.
Thanks, Matt. And Colleen, this question for you. What happens if the U.S. aid package doesn't happen?
It will be very grim. Like Matt shared, the Ukrainians will fight until the very end. But the air defense systems, the weapon systems, just the numbers of munitions that they need has to be bolstered from the United States. Europe and Ukraine have begun trying to increase their weapons production and their munitions economies. But unlike Russia, the United States nor Europe has adopted a war economy or a footing that can scale at the numbers that it's needed. So Russia has, we should point out as well. I believe 40% of the Russian economy is now focused on the defense industry. Ukraine is, of course, increasing and will continue to increase their own capabilities, but it will take a lot to replace the huge vacuum that will be created if the United States, if our Congress does not provide the aid and provide it quickly. Some experts called it a ammunition hunger for the Ukrainians, and now they're calling it an ammunition famine. So just to speak of the severity and how we are approaching a point that could make it or break it for many defensive positions that the Ukrainians are holding right now.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. That's a great rundown on that. And I wanted to share with everybody a few thoughts before we wrap up. We talk at Spirit of America a lot about Ukraine being on the front lines of the fight to defend the free world. And I want to be a little bit more granular about that and talk a little bit about the impact on America's security and on our own troops. So the Spirit of America team, not those you see here today, but the Spirit of America team is active, working alongside U.S. troops and diplomats in most of the world's toughest places outside of Ukraine. And everywhere we work, we see Russia behind the worst things happening in the world. So take a look at Eastern Europe, the rise of right-wing anti-democratic groups. Russia supports these groups and is stirring ethnic tensions. In the Middle East, Iran is backing attacks on U.S. troops and backing Hamas and Hezbollah. Who supports Iran? Russia. In West Africa, we see coups and toppling of democratic governments. Who is destabilizing West Africa? Russia. And in Asia Pacific, everyone knows that the threats of China will grow if Russia wins in Ukraine. Domestically, Russia is using very sophisticated misinformation campaigns to undermine Americans' faith in America and destroy us from within. That's a bit of a picture outside of Ukraine. So if Russia wins in Ukraine, every one of the problems I just mentioned is going to get much worse. We will pay a much higher price, and our own troops will be in harm's way. So that's a bit of the security picture. The other reason Ukraine matters is moral. So Michael, could you put up the one photograph I sent you a few minutes ago? Okay, so in August with Matt and Colleen, I visited a Ukrainian school in a village not far from the Russian border. And the village had been occupied by Russian soldiers. And I want to tell you about Bodana, the 15-year-old Ukrainian girl I met there. She's the one in this photograph in the red shirt. So Bodana had participated in a program created by Spirit of America called UActive. And UActive teaches Ukrainian high school students entrepreneurial skills so they can be leaders in building their communities and rebuilding their communities and helping their communities recover. So the student teams develop project ideas and compete for micro grants, and the winners get funds to implement their ideas and help their communities. So 99% of what Spirit of America has done in Ukraine this year has been working hand in hand with U.S. troops to provide the kind of assistance Matt and Colleen just talked about to help Ukraine win. UActive is the other 1%. So we met the UActive students in the classroom that you see here, and they told us the Russians had used it for interrogations. No one said much about what that really meant, what happened in that room, but the students were really proud. They had transformed it into the school STEM classroom. You can see little pictures of rulers and beakers and so forth on the drawings and everything. It was cheerful and bright. And so some of the kids talked about how Russian snipers had taken aim at them when the kids ventured outside their homes during the occupation. Bodana and the other kids here were very fortunate. They had survived the occupation and thus far had survived the war. Bodana was shy. She was the last one to speak. But when she started, it was just great. She really lit up. And she said that Spirit of America had inspired her. And so we said, well, why? How'd that happen? And she explained that UActive showed her that an ordinary girl from a small village in Ukraine, like her, could do something important to help her country at its time of greatest need. And it was, for all of us, it was just like a powerful moment we'll never forget. So you look at these children, and I think, you have to say, well, as Americans, do we think it's okay to leave boys and girls like these to be interrogated, kidnapped, or killed? Well, of course not. And that's just part of what's at stake. You can drop that, Michael. Thank you. So all of us, we talk about and we rightly celebrate the greatest generation. And we stand on the shoulders of that generation. And they were great because so many Americans did their part to protect our freedom and democracy. And by doing their part, they set the world on a new trajectory. And so since World War II, we've enjoyed prosperity, freedom, and security that's unprecedented in human history. Literally unprecedented. But that only happened because we won. So to understand what's at stake now with Ukraine and Russia's war in Ukraine, we just need to imagine what the world would be like if we had lost World War II. And if we hand Putin a victory, we'll live with the consequences for generations. And all of us know, Matt and Colleen, as veterans, especially the other veterans on our team, but the whole team at Spirit of America, we deal with these things in practical ways all the time, these challenges. And we understand they can seem overwhelming, and that, America has plenty of problems and it's hard to know what to do about them. But it's important to remember that America doesn't stand for perfection. It stands for something even better. And it's the efforts of citizens like all of us to make things better, to strive for that improvement, living up to our ideals. Because government can't do it alone. None of us can do it alone. But if each of us does our part, united, we can. So you can be confident that at Spirit America, we are going to do our very best to do our part. And for everyone here, now is the time to lean forward and do your part. You can support our efforts in Ukraine, of course. You can spread the words to your friends. Right now, what I want to encourage everybody to do is to call your representative in Congress and tell him or her, support Ukraine. Tell them it's important to you. Leave your zip code. Tell them you vote too, for that matter. And get a couple of friends to do it as well. And do not underestimate the impact that will have. A couple of years ago, a congressional staffer told me that their congressperson had received an overwhelming response about some issue that they were dealing with at the time. And I said, well, okay, how many people called? And it was something like 35 people had called the congressperson. And you go, it was unbelievable, but it was true. So the calls you make are going to make a difference. If you feel that that's the right thing to do, of course, please do it. Don't wait. When you get off this call, get their phone number and give them a ring. Please. And we just ask you to do that and get other folks to do it as well. Now's the time we have to lean forward. And these relatively small acts that we all make are nothing compared to the sacrifices of those who came before us. And with that, thank you for being with us today.